Hi everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and my first question this week comes from Finite Atticus, who asks, how do you feel about radical feminism? I would consider myself a feminist in the fact that I believe in equal rights for men and women, but radical, I don't know. In asking that question, you raise another very important question, which is what do you mean by radical feminism? Because you hear it referred to a lot, especially by people who don't consider themselves feminists. You hear people talk about radical feminists. I have no problem with feminism. It's these radical feminists that I have a problem with. And I very rarely hear it defined, and the definition that I can sort of infer from the comments that people make about these radical feminists is that radical feminists are women who are just angry at men and they're misandrist and they want to have a position in society where females are not just equal to males but are superior, and they really want to stick it to all us males for forcing females to suffer for all these years. And I have to tell you, I have never really encountered anyone like that, personally. Uh, in my years on the internet, in my years making videos, I've made several videos where I express feminist sympathies or where I discuss issues like the men's rights movement that are sort of related to feminism or reactions to feminism. So I've had plenty of interactions with people, men and women, who describe themselves as feminists, and I've never encountered a feminist, female or male, that behaves in that way or that expresses themselves in that way. So, and I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm sure that the internet is full of people, and the internet is full of crazy, unreasonable people. I'm sure that there are women on the internet who espouse those kinds of views, who are bitter and angry toward men, and who say, "I wish that we could have a world where women ran the show and men did our bidding and fuck men." I do not doubt for a second that those people exist and that they are writing blogs, making videos, etc. All I'm saying is I think that their influence and their number among the feminist movement is grossly overstated by people who are critics and opponents of feminism, and people who are afraid of feminism, and people who don't understand what it is and what its goals actually are. I have Facebook friends who are women and describe themselves as radical feminists. They take that identity on themselves, and they say they self-identify as radical feminists, and they are nothing like the caricature of radical feminism that you hear discussed by men's rights movement groups or throughout the Manosphere or these various anti-feminist spheres that you can find on the internet very easily. They're nothing like that. They're not anti-male at all. Most of them are married to men or have close relationships with men, the ones that are heterosexual, and that stereotype just doesn't seem very common at all in reality. And I will say something else too, is that those women who are radical feminists in that stereotypical sort of man-hating way, even though I can't support that view and I can't say that I share their goals, I understand where they're coming from. And that's very different than the radical anti-feminists that you find on the MRA websites and the whiny, aggrieved douchebag dude bros who bitch about their ex-wives or their ex-girlfriends or all the girls that wouldn't fuck them even after they paid for dinner. All those assholes. I don't get where they're coming from, other than the fact that they're just selfish, needy, whiny assholes. Radical feminists, angry feminists, I can understand why a woman with some political sensitivity and some awareness of how this culture works, I can understand why a woman would be pissed off. I wouldn't share any sort of goal, any sort of anti-male goals or any sort of misandrist goals that a feminist would have. But if there's a woman who you can point me to who is saying angry, hateful things about men, even though I completely condemn that sort of behavior and I don't share that sort of hateful anti-male bigotry any more than I would anti-female bigotry, I get where they're coming from. Because they do have a case. Because women are the group with the grievance. between men and women, if we divide people that way, clearly women are the group with the grievance. Men are not, in general, as groups. Doesn't mean that there aren't individual men who have been completely fucked over. Doesn't mean that there aren't individual women that have had wonderful, great, privileged lives. I'm talking just as groups. Clearly women are the aggrieved group, not men. So I understand where radical feminists of that kind are coming from, but the larger point is there really aren't nearly as many of them, and they aren't nearly as influential in feminism as a whole as that I have seen as people who talk about radical feminists would like us to believe. Philip Rottingham, Steve, I was watching your 5 Stupid Things About the Manosphere, and it reminded me of other videos when you were talking about MRAs and the MRM. Do you think there is an actual overlap between the two? Also, have you ever met any guys who were pickup artists? And if so, what did you think of them? Are they actually as good at getting laid as they lead people to believe? I think there is some overlap. I think people who self-identify as MRA are probably more politically minded, whereas people who would consider themselves or would fall into the category of pickup artists are probably just mostly worried about getting laid, and they don't have as much interest in the larger sort of socio-political ramifications of their attitudes and their actions. But I think they definitely share things in common. Both groups exhibit very negative, regressive attitudes toward women. That's something they definitely have in common, and I'm sure that there is, if you did a Venn diagram of the two groups, there would be a sizable section in the middle where they overlap. But they're not exactly the same group. I would say they're very closely related, and they probably share a lot of members. But the MRA types and the Manosphere pickup artist types are not exactly the same group. I don't know if I've ever known anyone who was a proper pickup artist. I've never known anyone who was sort of like a mystery type who prided himself on his ability to go out and get laid, or read the books or went to the websites and boned up on the terminology and the strategies and all. I mean, there are guys who are like that, who are just very dedicated pickup artist types. I've never known anyone like that, at least not to my knowledge. I've never known that I knew anyone like that. But then again, I don't go out. I mean, I don't go to clubs. I don't go to bars. I'm never in situations where those types of guys would be plying their trade. But I have known guys who were sort of unofficially of that type, who were very easy about going up to women and flirting with women and making passes at women, and in ways that sort of crossed the line, I felt, from just casual friendly flirtation into sort of, something that was a little less than appropriate. I've known people like that, and some of them did pretty well as far as getting women to fuck them, and some of them didn't. But I was never comfortable around any of them. I always was sort of like, I would, if I was out at a restaurant with someone like that and he would, start macking on the waitress, I would always sort of go like that. I was always mortified to be around people like that. Isaac Barlow. Hi, Steve. I'm a published writer. I've written 2 novels, who is now trying his hand at screenwriting. Any advice? Yes, ask for advice from a more successful screenwriter. If you have had 2 novels published, that is awesome, and you are way ahead of me in the game. I've had a few short screenplays produced by a local independent film company, Neon Reel Entertainment, by the way, which I love and adore and will never forsake, but it's not exactly, notable success in the business. But having said that, my advice to anyone who wants to start screenwriting is to find as many screenplays for as many different kinds of movies as you can. And on the internet now, that is quite easy. And read them. And then, if possible, watch the movie. And if you're really a dedicated student, a really good thing to do is to, if you can possibly find multiple drafts of the script for a film, which again, for certain films is very easy to do. There are websites where you can find multiple drafts of the script. Like, you can get the first draft and then further drafts and all the way up to the actual shooting script that they use to make the film. Read those, compare the differences, watch the film and notice what made it onto the screen and what didn't. And also notice how the directions on the page translate onto screen. One of the things that I had trouble learning when I first got into screenwriting was I would watch a movie and something would happen, and like a directorial technique, like a camera movement or a dissolve or a fade or a cut to a close up and then a bang out to a wide shot, technical things that I would think, shit, how do you, if you want to do that and and you want to indicate that in the script, how do you do that? And the best way to find out stuff like that is to read scripts and watch films. My second piece of advice is to watch that, to not indicate too many specific shots in your screenplay, especially if you're writing a first draft or you're writing something maybe like a spec script that you're hoping to sell. Do not try to direct the movie on the page. Describe the scene, write great dialogue, write great characters, come up with really great situations, but try not to indicate particular shots unless it's absolutely vital to the story. Jay McJackamey, as a lit major and filmmaker, what is your position on subtext or deconstruction? Do you think, for example, that there is anything to trying to interpret, say, vampires as Nazis or communists or werewolves as religious people who can suddenly become dangerous? Well, I think it depends on the movie, and I think it depends on the perceived subtext. That sort of thing can be fun. Like, it's a lot of fun to look at a film and try to read it in terms of its subtext and try to think like, oh, the vampires, that the vampirism stands for AIDS, and things like that. And sometimes in certain films that seems more obvious than others. You can do that with pretty much any movie. You can look at a movie and you can sort of decide that this actually represents that, or that this is meant to stand for that, and make a pretty good case for it. But where I would caution people is in deciding that it was there due to the intention of the filmmaker. I have found, and I generally assume most of the time, that what we perceive to be subtext or hidden messages or allegories that can be perceived in films is mostly us bringing things to the film. It's not anything that was intentionally put there by the filmmaker. There are filmmakers, there are writers and directors who work that way, who do intentionally put subtexts and certain themes into their writing, hoping that the audience will notice it. And in some cases, it's really obvious. Like if you look at, to cite a really broad, obvious example, I mean, if you look at an episode of the original Star Trek show, where clearly the Klingons or the Romulans are meant to represent the Soviets, and the Federation is meant to represent the United States, and the little local conflict on this planet is meant to represent the Vietnam War, where these two massive powers are sort of fighting each other by proxy through these much smaller cultures. Sometimes it's like that and it's obvious, but other times it's not as obvious, and in those cases my instinct is to err on the side of, well, it's probably not really there. It's just us as the audience bringing something to it. And I think it can be fun as long as you are aware of that separation, as long as you're aware that, well, this is a really interesting way to look at the movie, and it might make it more fun to watch, and it might enable you to find things out about it that you didn't already know, but it doesn't mean that the artist meant for it to be there. And to me, that's an important distinction to make. Bassbait, Steve, would you agree with the phrase, a person is not necessarily stupid, but people are stupid? I kind of made that up myself, but I feel like this basic idea has been said by someone else before. I mean, look at most areas of life. Religion, for example, almost requires that you spend a lot of time around religious people and not a lot of time outside of religion. The influence of others causes you to start being more receptive to bad ideas. I'd love your general thoughts on this. Yeah, I would agree with you that people in general are stupid, but I would hasten to point out that usually when people say things like that, they never think of themselves as being in the stupid group. You can say, most people are stupid. And I can say, yeah, I agree with you, most people are stupid. But we both know we're not stupid, right? It's interesting, isn't it? Whenever we draw those lines, we always make sure that we're on the good side, not the bad side. I think it's fair. I think it's completely fair to draw broad conclusions about patterns that you notice in a group of people, as long as you don't use that broad conclusion to draw conclusions about any particular individual. That's why I like the way you phrased it. People are stupid, but a person is not necessarily stupid. Because otherwise you'd be like, well, people are stupid. Hey, there's a person, he's probably stupid. That's not fair. But if you look at things, if you look at broad social trends, if you look at the types of movies that are popular, if you look at the number of people who believe in claims of religions that are totally preposterous and unfounded, if you look at the number of people here in the United States that believe in some form of creationism, or believe that the Bible holds some sort of special magical supernatural power, or any number of other things, yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that in general, overall, people are stupid. But it's also a matter of opinion, and it's a matter of taste. And the things that make people stupid might be different for me than for you. I mean, I think riding motorcycles is stupid. I think watching football is stupid. Lots of people disagree with me on that. Lots of people would not, if they were making a list of stupid shit about people, those items would not be on their list. And things that I don't think are as stupid, like, say, pro wrestling, which I acknowledge the stupidity of, but I'm still a huge fan of, might be right at the top of their list. So it depends. You know, yeah, the definition of stupid varies according to the person. The things that make you stupid vary according to the person. But I think if you ask most people that question, they would say, yeah, most people are stupid. And they would also exclude themselves from the stupid group. Warp Rules. Question: while I'm in no way opposed to homosexuals and their activities, it still gives me an uneasy feeling seeing, for example, two men kissing, especially if it's passionate. I'm not sure if this is a result of upbringing or whether it's innate, like sexuality itself. Do you think it's normal to get such an uneasy feeling? And do you think one should achieve to get rid of it, or simply accept it as something normal and innate, especially when it does not lead to discrimination, etc.? Look, you say that it doesn't affect your attitude toward gay people and toward whether or not they should have equal rights or how they should be treated. If it doesn't change the way you treat people, if it doesn't compel you to mistreat people or to advocate that they be mistreated by the law or things like that, it just sounds like a personal hang-up that you would probably do better to get over. I mean, because I used to be that way. Before I was exposed to it more, before I knew more gay people personally, for example, and got to see them, yeah, and sort of had it brought home to me that they're no different than I am, that they're not aliens, they're not these strange creatures, they're just human beings, just like straight people. I used to have that feeling of sort of queasiness when I would see, like, two men being affectionate with each other, but it doesn't bother me now, because I no longer see it as anything strange or odd or threatening, whatever, and I feel like I'm a better person for that. Now, if it doesn't cause you to mistreat people, if you're okay with it in that sense, it's just something that kind of grosses you out, then I actually sort of commend you for not taking your personal sense of something gross and using that as an excuse for mistreating people and for advocating anti-gay laws, as so much of the anti-gay movement has done. Now, I think the gross out factor, the ick factor, is a huge part of what sustains the anti-gay movement today, is that there are just a lot of people who think that two men kissing each other is gross and they shouldn't have to see it. So if you have moved beyond that and sort of said, yes, I do think it's gross, but I don't think that it should affect how people are treated in society or how I treat them, then I applaud you for that. I think that's great. But I do think it's kind of a hang-up. It's a bit of baggage, and you would be better off trying to rid yourself of it. Sometimes I think maybe I should rid myself of that. But then I think better of it, because it signifies that it's time for my favorite part of the show, which is...
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Nathan Norman, I have a wrestling question for you. What version of Sting is your favorite and why? Early Sting, bleach blonde, surfer, colorful face paint Sting. And the reason is because he had awesome matches with lots of people. Crow Sting was, first of all, the gimmick was a ripoff of a movie. The matches weren't nearly as great, and I don't think he really gave a fuck about his match quality by the time he got the Crow gimmick. Atheist Bob, hi Steve, does God exist? No. Nico Furr, what is the most embarrassing moment of your adult life? Cheers. There are many possibilities. The one that springs immediately to mind is when I was not looking where I was going when I was walking through a public library and I walked completely face first, head on, into a spinner rack of DVDs, like at full speed, like a really good, full, like a brisk walk. Bam! Right into a spinner rack full of DVDs, knocked half of the DVDs off onto the floor. I was immediately on my knees picking them up and putting them back on the shelf. It was embarrassing. Lady Tremere 85, random question, what would your death row meal be? I would probably go for a Reuben and a side of fries and a Coke. Nice big fountain Coke. AIGG, Steve, could you name a movie or two that you find to be genuinely creepy? You know, the kind of creepiness that sticks with you long after the movie ends and that makes you check for sinister things under your bed. I love films like that, but the good ones are so incredibly far between. I'm running out of movies to watch here. Well, the other ones I could suggest are ones you've probably already seen if you like movies like that. The first one that comes to mind is the original Let the Right One In, the original Swedish version. Such a great movie, a really great horror movie, and a great creepy vampire movie. And the other one, even though it's been made fun of and mocked and ridiculed to death to the point where it's not viewed as really scary by most people at all, but it's the original Blair Witch Project. When I first saw that in the theater, I had kind of a knot in my stomach at the end of that movie. That was really effective the first time I saw it. John Henderson, where would you rank Kane on the list of best big men in wrestling? Well, as a worker, I would rank him pretty high. As a worker, I would rank him right up there with, you know, Undertaker or Bam Bam Bigelow as a guy who, when motivated, could have a really good match. But in general, I'd rank him above average, not like way, way up here, but not down at the bottom either. I'd say he's above average. Methos, Steve, blue or green? Blue. Justin Ood, what is the most universal human characteristic, fear or laziness? Fear. David Landon, Steve, which Star Trek character do you think most closely matches your personality? Which Star Trek character do you wish you were most like? And also, Lursa and B'Etor, would you, if they wanted to? Lursa and B'Etor probably not, because I would fear for my personal safety. But I actually took one of those quizzes a few months ago about which Star Trek character are you, and it came up Captain Picard, which I was quite pleased with, because he's probably the one I would want to be the most like as well. I dig Captain Picard. He's a good dude. Because you know why? Because he's smart and he's ethical, and he still has no problems with the ladies. See? Nice guys can finish first. You don't always have to be a poonhound like Captain Kirk. You can be a good, solid dude like Picard, and the ladies will still be nice to you. Dr. Themo, do you believe same-sex marriage will continue being legalized state by state, or will it likely go so far before the federal government eventually just forces the remaining states to just legalize it? And if it does continue going state by state, which do you believe would be the last? My guess is either Utah or a tie between Mississippi and Louisiana. Yeah, if they keep going state by state, I think I would bet on Mississippi. If I absolutely had to put money down on what would be the last state to legalize same-sex marriage, it would be Mississippi. But I think it's probably going to go that second choice that you offer in the question. It's going to be there's going to be a Supreme Court ruling or some kind of congressional action or something where it'll just be a sweeping legalization that just covers the whole country, like Roe versus Wade with abortion, like Brown versus Board of Education, things like that, like Loving versus Virginia. There will be some sweeping Supreme Court ruling that will just strike down all of the anti-gay, all of the discriminatory marriage laws, and it'll just be legal everywhere all at once. And then Mississippi will be that state, as with slavery, where they won't officially repeal their law against it, even though they can't enforce it any longer. They won't officially repeal it until like 100 years from now. So That's it for the lightning round. That's it for the questions this week. Before I get out of here, I need to do a shout out, and the shout out this week is a really cool one. It goes to Rational Warrior, aka Tombstone the Dead Man. You may know him from his music. He did that song Poison that made the rounds in the atheist community on YouTube a few years ago. He's done other songs like Ballad of a Non-Believer and Manifesto that he released relatively recently. Really good shit. You should check it out, even if you're not really into hip hop. You should check it out because the subject matter is so compelling and very well written, very dense, sharply written lyrics in his songs, and a great voice both as a writer and just an actual physical voice. He has a great sound. And if you're just not into the hip hop thing at all, you're not even willing to give it a try, he also does vlogs where he is an incredibly sharp and concise thinker and speaker. He can take down religious arguments in very little time with a lot of strength and a lot of clarity. He's just one of our most intelligent and sharp and interesting and compelling voices in the YouTube atheist community. And he's gotten a fair amount of attention already. He's got about 11,000 subscribers on his channel, but it's another one of those cases where I look at his stuff and I see how good it is and I see how interesting it is and I think, God damn it, how do I have so many more subscribers than this guy? He should have as many as I have and a lot more. So check out Rational Warrior, and I think that you will really enjoy it and really like it. He's a really smart, really talented dude, and very, very well worth your time and your subscription. So check him out. That is it for this week. I will be back again next week to do this all over again, provided, of course, that you ask me some questions. So please leave a comment on this video. Ask me your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything, whatever you want to hear me express an opinion on, whatever you want to know about me, whatever you want to ask me about movies or TV or whatever, atheism, religion, etc., etc. Politics. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. Go for it. Ask me anything about anything, and I will answer as many of them as I possibly can next time. So I will see you guys next time. Until then, take care.